Hello and welcome to Epiphytic Cacti. Today let's take a look at what I believe is Rhipsalis elliptica. Now I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm pretty sure though. Generally these sort of flat-clade Rhipsalis like this, there's a handful of them that can be very confused for each other. And I think that one of the reasons why they're so hard to identify is partially because there is not a lot of correct identification. So it's really hard to find correctly identified pictures of these, or even really to be able to tell or discern like the real differences, especially, and even some of their descriptions, like how they were described, is very similar. This particular species grows in Brazil. The IUCN redlist.org site lists it as least concern with a population that is decreasing. I think I've had this plant for a few years now. So I think I've had this one for about 2 years. It's one that I keep in my Rhipsalis closet over the colder months, and then I bring it outside in the warmer months, as I do with almost all of my epiphytic cacti. There is a very, very small amount of them where they don't come outside. If you are looking for this plant, or if you have one yourself that you're like, what is this plant? There's a few things. The clades always form at the ends of the other clades. That it's very rare in this that I have ever seen a clade emerge from any of the side areoles. At a closer look, you can see what I mean here. The new clades, they always sort of form at the bottom few areoles here, usually right at the tip. But there are some occasions where it will form, you know, like here you have a little side areole coming out of this one, but it's still one of the tip areoles. So that's interesting to note. They don't have a bunch of growth coming out of the sides here. Another thing to note is how tapered these are at the base. So they're very tapered at the base, and then the first areole is somewhat of a distance away. You can see it's flowering, which is of course why I'm doing the video. There's generally one flower per areole. There have been 2 flowers for a very small amount of them, but mostly it's been 1 flower per areole. This, I believe, is the first time that this has ever bloomed. So in the 2 years that I had it, so it took a little bit of growing before it seems like it was going to bloom. I have had cuttings of some of these bloom before, but in terms of them blooming subsequently as established plants, they seem to be a little bit slower than some of the other Rhipsalis. They do seem to need to get to be a fairly established size before they really start blooming. You can see the amount of blooms that are on this. It really just decided that it was going to bloom here. It's got these beautiful little like yellowish blooms. And you can see all these buds, and you know, in some places it almost decided that it was going to have 1 flower per areole on some of these clades. You can see some of them are still in bud form, some of them are just opening, some of them are open, and some of them are going a little bit over. These are actually going a little bit over. It'll be really helpful if this is self-fertile and it produces berries. I don't really know if this species is or not. Sometimes I don't really know until I've had them, and then I see whether or not they produce berries. On the flowers, I generally see 5 petals. I think that there might be sort of one that's in the back of there. Yeah, so I think that looking straight on in the flower, it looks like there's 5 petals, but there's actually 6, I think, because there's one that seems to be kind of a smaller one that's in the back. And the other thing that I noticed is that it does have a little tiny bit of red or orange at the very tips of some of the petals. And that may be more or less, sunlight will cause that more or less. This is one that can be dark green. It can be reddish. It can actually be almost violet. So when you expose this to sunlight, there are some clones that I imagine can get very red, and then there are some clones that, you know, will just get kind of reddish. And I can see it in some of these, a little bit of a reddish tinge on the clades, but I don't have this in full sun. I have this on my patio pergola back here, so it's in quite a bit of shade. There we go. So here was another clade that was very floriferous. It's really pretty. I like the orderly fashion of how all of these are lined up. So you can see it looks like there's 5 petals, but like I said, there's a subsequent one in the back that it's just not all that visible from the front. And you can see all the cute little stamen, and then you see the stigma there, and you can see a little bit of the kind of pinkish or reddish tipping on those petals. Rhipsalis blooms while they may be small. You know, they don't have that same big showy kind of thing like some of those Daiso-cactus hybrids. They have a tendency to be very sort of magical looking in person. They're reminiscent of things like snowflakes. They have so many of these stamen protruding out of these little tiny flowers. They just kind of have a little bit of a magic touch to them. It's really quite remarkable. So this is kind of what I mean here. Off of this clade, it doesn't have any side branches back here, but it only has these ones at the tips. Instead of growing straight down, it has a tendency to kind of angle out and down. It's a little bit wider, where a lot of them will just hang straight down. This one kind of spreads out and goes down. You see these shoots that are coming out? I don't know if that is a normal thing that some of these Rhipsalis can produce. I do know that there is one that very commonly produces those, and that would be crispata. This is definitely not crispata, but it's interesting because I'm not sure if there are others that produce those kinds of long shoots like that, or this particular plant, because it is kind of a strange shape. When I put it in the Rhipsalis closet, it was in a place where it didn't get a lot of light, and then it started shooting out those two. So that might be something that it was doing because of a lack of light, but it also might be something that it does. One of the things that I thought was really unique about that is that off of this long sort of shoot that it produced here, it has a lot more areoles than it does on its like normal clades. And notice that the clades that it's growing off of it, they're not all clustered at the tip, at least not on this one. They are on the second one, but not on this one. So that's the only time that I have ever seen this plant produce clades not directly out of the tip areoles. I really like its new growth. You can see all this new growth that it has. I mean, it's blooming and growing at the same time. It's a very active plant. You can see all that new growth, and it had more new growth than this, but I've been playing around with this plant, taking pictures and stuff, and then for the video and everything, and I have sort of knocked a few clades off here and there. So yeah, whoops. But let me see if I can kind of back up a little bit and we can get an idea of what I mean when I say it like really grows kind of wide. There you go. So there's a really good idea of what I mean. You know, you can see how wide that's growing and how it's really growing out and down versus just down. So one that requires just a little bit more room. I hope that you've enjoyed taking a look at what I hope is Rhipsalis elliptica with me. Thank you for watching, and happy cacti growing.